Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Thanks for joining today. We are in the midst of October, which for those of us who live in this world of college admissions year after year is probably the most stressful and busiest month, mostly because so many students do tend to submit an application by at least one of the early deadlines. And November 1 is just this huge deadline that's looming, but things get easier after November 1. So that's the good news. And the good news for those of you who are going through this process and who are applying by an early deadline, the good news is that typically once you get that first one out the door, it's not as hard to get the rest of them completed. So anyway, today we are focused on applications and seniors, and we are spending some of our time talking about essay prompts. So we're specifically going to be talking about the Yale supplement and the Penn State Schreier's Honors College supplement, which you may have heard Karen Spencer and I complaining about back on the show on October 7th. But today we're not going to complain. We're just going to walk you through it and help you understand how to complete it. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about EFC and NPC. And joining me is my colleague, Chrissy Ferran. Hi, Chrissy.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, and thank you for joining today because this is something I know almost nothing about. Certainly EFC rings a bell with me, NPC less so. So these are college cost calculators, and I guess as we get started, why don't we start with the first one, which is what is an EFC? What's that all about?
Yeah, so we're having fun with acronyms today. So
Yes.
the EFC is basically it's what's called the expected family contribution. And what that is it's basically the result that you get when a family fills out the FAFSA. As a lot of people may know or not know, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. So when you fill out the FAFSA, you put in all sorts of information into that form, and when they calculate it, they basically give you, the government tells you what they think your EFC is, which is also basically what that is it's what they think you can reasonably pay for 1 year of college costs for your child. So the EFC can be a range of numbers. It can be zero, it can be 45,000, it can be 95,000. Typically, the lower the number, the lower your expected family contribution, the better your chances are of getting need-based aid. So the expected family contribution is that number. The EFC is used by every college in the nation, basically.
Got it.
So it's an important number to know when you're filling out the FAFSA, and to know, to compare college costs, things like that.
Okay, so which begs the question, how do colleges use that EFC? So they've got this number now. How do they use it in their process?
Yeah, good question. So every college in the nation will use they'll use your same EFC, whether it's a 2-year community college, whether it's a 4-year private school, or a 4-year public college. So as I said, your EFC could be zero, it could be 90,000. It really just depends on the information that you provide on that FAFSA. So really what colleges will do with that is they take your EFC, your expected family contribution, and then they compare that with their college's own cost of attendance. And so cost of attendance includes tuition and fees, it includes room and board, books. So basically what it would cost for your child to go to school and live for a year on campus, that's the cost of attendance. So they take your EFC, they compare it with your cost of attendance. If your EFC number, if that's larger than the college's cost of attendance, you pretty much typically won't qualify for any need-based aid at the school. Because the college thinks that you can already pay for it. So if your EFC is, $36,000 and the college costs $30,000 a year,
Right.
they already think you can pay. So they're not probably going to offer you much in terms of need-based aid. However, if your EFC is less, so if you're looking at a, more of a private school where the cost of attendance is higher, if your EFC is less than that college's cost of attendance, now you have a gap. And so the college will hopefully help you fill that gap with different types of need-based aid. It could be grants or scholarships, it could be work study, it could be interest-free student loans. So really the larger the gap that you have with that college's cost of attendance, the better your chances can be at getting help from that school. So depending on the school and the cost of the college, you could get more help from a private school technically than you could a state school. It depends on your EFC and the cost of the college.
Right. And it probably does bear repeating. It's something we've talked about in the past. Just because there is a gap between what the EFC has determined you can afford to pay and what the college costs, not every college fills the gap. So unfortunately, you could have an EFC of 0 and
Right.
have a college that thinks you can, well, doesn't think, they know you can't afford to pay 20,000 a year, but that will be what they just
Yeah.
say, that's what their package is, right? Not
Yeah.
ideal, but
I have families that we talk to and say, oh, well, our EFC was, 36,000, but the college is telling us we have to pay 49,000. We don't understand. But
right.
there's a lot of colleges that can't fill 100% of every family's gap that exists. So they do the best they can. Some colleges can, but it's not, the majority of them. So
Right.
you could wind up paying more than your EFC shows.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, what information goes into determining the EFC? That I'm sure a lot of people are saying, well, how are they going to come up with this number?
Yeah. So the EFC, there's so many things that actually go into calculating your expected family contribution on the FAFSA. When you fill out that form, basically they look at your income, they look at assets, they look at the number of people in your household. So if you have, 5 children, you may have a better chance than if you had 1 child. They look at the number of people in college. They take into account the age of the parents. So those are just a few of the things that help determine it. They look at student assets. They look at student income. So if your child did work, if they have, money saved in their own name, that can certainly affect it and be a factor too. But there's a lot of different calculations that go into calculating your expected family contribution, but those are the main ones for the
Got
most
it.
part.
And actually, this brings us to the topic today, which we're talking about these cost calculators. So,
Yep.
does it help, do you think, to use an EFC calculator?
I think so. I mean, it's obviously you need to kind of know what an EFC is in the first place, which is kind of why we were talking about that. But
Right, right.
I think if you're just, we talk to a lot of parents on the phone who are just starting the college planning process. Maybe their child is a freshman in high school, maybe they're a junior and they're just thinking, okay, now we're starting to get serious about this. And they're really wondering what their chances are of qualifying for financial aid or for need-based aid. These calculators can really help give you a good general idea of what the government thinks your ability to pay would be. And so you can use that to compare with colleges that your child is looking at. So you can, if you know what your general EFC is from these calculators, as I said, you can compare those to the schools. If your child already has some interest in some schools, look at that cost of attendance, see if you have a gap, see how big that gap is, and you may get some help from the school. So you just need to keep in mind that these calculators aren't exact. They're not going to be the exact EFC that the FAFSA is going to give you there. It's more of a general number. It just is supposed to give you an idea of, hey, we're not going to get any financial aid at, a public school in our state, but maybe we'll get some at a private, that kind of a thing.
Right, right.
So really the only way to know what your actual EFC is to fill out the FAFSA in your child's senior year of high school. Usually in October is when that opens. But we do have a really good website that we typically refer families to for an EFC calculator. The website is just bigfuture.org. And that's the same website. It's sponsored by the College Board who does the SAT test. So you can go to that website, you can search on their website for the EFC calculator, and you really want to have your most recent tax information and your asset information with you when you're completing it. So the great thing is it doesn't ask for any login information. It doesn't have you create an account or anything. It's really just a calculator that's asking you for numbers so that you can see results.
Right. So it's not keeping those in any way. It's just
No.
you would use it like you use the calculator on your phone. When
Yep.
you delete it, it's gone. Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
So we talked about EFC calculator and mentioned an NPC calculator, which I now see is the net price calculator. So before we talk about
Acronyms.
the difference between those two calculators, can you very quickly give us a definition on what net price is?
Yeah. So the net price of a school is basically what your family will have to pay. It's the sticker price basically minus any financial aid, scholarships, grants, that the school might offer. So a lot of families don't end up paying the actual sticker price of a school. Usually there is some type of aid that's offered or merit scholarships or something. So The net price is the sticker price that's published on the college's website minus anything they might offer you for financial aid purposes or academic purposes.
Okay.
And so what you ultimately will end up paying is your sticker price.
Got it. Okay. So then what is the difference between, I think you kind of have alluded to this now, an EFC calculator and a net price calculator?
Yeah, so these are both really great tools. We use them a lot. We talk about them a lot with families. The EFC calculator, as I kind of explained earlier, it's really what a family would use to determine your overall general expected family contribution. And you can use that one number to compare at any college in the nation, public, private, 2-year, 4-year. You can use that same number to compare college costs. The the net price calculator, that's a calculator that every college website has on their own website. They're required to have that by the Department of Education. It is a calculator specific to the college itself and to their cost of attendance. So if a family, so you can know what your general EFC is, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know what the college itself may offer. So
Right.
if a family has specific colleges in mind, if they've got a list already of 3, 4, 5 colleges, sometimes you can get a good accurate estimate of what their real cost would be by going to that college's website, searching for the net price calculator and putting in roughly the same type of information that you would for an EFC calculator. So you will get a different result with every net price calculator that you use.
Right.
Because every college has a different cost of attendance. Some are 80,000, some are 30,000, some are 45. They all cost different amounts and they all have different types of funding
Right.
and how they award that funding. So just keep that in mind that you'll get a different amount for each college because it's telling you what the college thinks that you'll have to pay for that particular school.
Right. And there's a great example of where you might see that gap piece come into play, right? Where your
Yeah.
EFC is 30,000 and then the net price calculator for a given school might tell you 45,000 and then
Right.
that's what you will ultimately pay and then you'll know before your child applies, gets accepted that, oh, that's
Hmm.
not going to be feasible for us. Or maybe it is
Right.
feasible. Maybe you're saying, well, the EFC is 30, but we would be willing to pay 45. And then you know
Right.
that that's perfectly within bounds, but that's what
Yeah,
it is.
and some schools, like I know there's a couple schools I've been kind of playing around with these calculators, for the last couple of years too. And some schools will give you a range. They'll say, well, this might be the high range of what we would require you to pay. This might be the kind of the average, and then this might be the lower range. So they give
Right.
you a little bit of a range. Some schools will tell you, if it's scholarships and grants and loans. So it's so different on each college's website. So it's a great idea if you have the time to do each of the colleges your child is looking at applying to.
Right. And, for the listeners out there who have been following along, my son is currently applying to college. And as we
Hmm.
are talking, I was thinking, I don't know that I actually have done the NPC. I
Yeah,
have a general sense of how much I think it's going to
yeah,
cost, but I probably should check that out.
yeah.
Well,
It's a
and then
great
that,
tool.
yeah, and it brings me to the next thing, and another reason why I think that it's going to be different from school to school. And the question here is, does that net price calculator include merit scholarships? Because there are schools out there who are offering merit scholarships. Really, in effect, they're discounting, right?
Hmm.
And that's going to be different at every school.
Yeah, so it really depends on the college. So there are some colleges that use their own calculators. They invent their own calculators. They might
Mhm.
ask for student GPA. They might ask for any test score information, where they rank in their class. So any of those kinds of questions can also help the college determine kind of how much of a merit scholarship they might be offering a
Mhm.
student. Other schools might have the same exact information that they're asking as the EFC calculator that you do on like the bigfuture.org website. It might be the same information. And so they may leave out any scholarships that might be related to merit. So again, it's really important when you're on these websites, these school websites, using these calculators, you want to make sure you're reading the information that the college is providing to see what are they including in their calculator. Is it including, some kind of merit offer? Is it just based on need-based aid? And then, you can look at too, again, like I said earlier, some of the schools will include what kinds of aid they might offer you. So it's good to know if some of those aids are, that they're offering is a subsidized loan or work study. So really look at the results. But again, this is a great reason why it's a good idea to do it at every school to get a good sense. And it's not going to be it's not going to be exact. I mean, it is, again, just a general idea of what the school thinks they'll pay you. So it's not like a binding kind of agreement that that's what you're getting until you file all the forms that you need to file and hear back from the school.
Right. Actually, one thing that I found, I was on one net price calculator on one school. And what was interesting is that was one of the schools where they asked for a student's test scores and GPA. And
Hmm.
so one of the things I did was take a look at if the GPA went up slightly, or probably in this case, because the GPA was fairly fixed, if the test scores went up slightly, how did that change the merit picture? Because they were
Yeah.
factoring in merit aid. And that can be an interesting exercise to see, gee,
Yeah.
is it worth the test prep, right? Because I could see
Sure.
clearly that if the scores went up 50 points overall in the composite on the
Hmm.
SAT, this in this case, that the merit went up about 10,000. And so, was it worth it to spend $3,000 on some
Yeah.
additional prep
Yeah.
for those scores to potentially increase, which would have amounted to, if you do, if you subtract the 3 from the 10, that's $7,000.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes it's worth it to do the test prep. Now,
Yeah.
granted, if the student was more like 150 points away from that additional 10,000, well, then,
Hmm.
it's probably not
Right.
realistic to imagine that's going to change. But, as you
Yeah.
think about those things, and I know we're in a test optional world, so
Yeah.
it's not always so cut and dried, but
Yeah, but it's a good calculator to play around with too financially. I mean, if the family thinks they're going to sell some assets or cash in something, they can change around the calculations just to see kind of how that, just like you said, how that changes what the school might offer. So,
right, exactly. So you don't always have to put in the actual, but remind
right.
yourself, I've changed some figures,
Right.
right? This is not
This might not be the
happening.
real number.
Exactly. And it might not be attainable. So in the case
Right.
of where you're looking at, oh wow, with 50 more points, it's 10,000 more dollars. Well,
Yeah,
if your child doesn't get that 50 more points, you're not getting
you
that
don't get
additional
that.
10,000, right? So you have
Exactly.
to remind yourself, I
Yep.
have put fake numbers in here.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
well, so it sounds like you recommend using both calculators. Is that a fair assessment?
I do. I mean, I think especially if you're just starting out and you're not sure, how to work everything, how to pay for everything, this will give you a really great overall idea of number one, what the government thinks that your ability to pay is with that EFC calculator. But with the net price calculator, then you'll know kind of what the college that itself will kind of think what they could pay you guys. So, it can be specific to each college. So I just think they're great tools for families that are starting the process, or if you're knee deep in the process and you're, even right now in October, if you're still filling out the FAFSA, you may not hear from colleges until next March or next
Right.
April what you're eligible for. So it's even good now just to get an idea of kind of where you're at. So, just keep in mind they're only estimate numbers. Actual numbers come once you do the FAFSA and you apply to the school for that merit scholarship. But yeah, I think they're great. They're easy to use. They're very available. So
Okay.
absolutely. Once you do one, the next one's pretty easy to do because you have all the info for the most part.
Awesome. Chrissy, thanks so much for joining us today and talking us through this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth. Have a great day.
All right, you too. All right,
Bye
we're
bye.
going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the Yale supplement. So don't go away.